Oh, this has become way too long for a video. You can't have that in there. I must type this away.
Thanks for tuning in at Brackies.
Hello everyone and welcome to video number 16 on making a multiplayer FPS in Unity. Today we are going to be fixing the bug that I pointed out in the last video, where when we spawn a player in, he will change the health and settings for all of the other players. That also means spawning a particle effect on all of the other players that are already in the game. And that looks super weird and it's not a behavior that we want, so we're going to separate that out. So that's going to be really good to finally take care of. And also we are going to be moving some of our functionality when joining a network into a separate scene. I want to now create the idea of two separate scenes, one offline scene where we connect to other players or choose to host a game, and later that will be maybe lobby oriented where people can join your game before it starts and stuff like that. And then we transition over to the online scene where the game actually takes place. So without further ado, let's dig right into it. So you can see that I am here in Unity, and I'm just going to load up our main level scene here. And first off, let me just demonstrate what is currently going wrong when we play the game. So let me just make a very quick build here. I'm simply pressing Ctrl B to make that build very quickly. And it's going to open up here. And I'm going to go into Unity here, wait for the lighting to rebake, and then hit play. And then we are going to select maybe a LAN host here. And then over here we can select LAN client. And you will notice that the other guy spawns a particle system as well. So that means that we are calling a certain method. If we go under our player and then player setup, and then open that script up in Visual Studio, there's a very special method in the script, and it's called setup. And we are calling that on all of the different players. We should be calling it on all clients, but only on the player that currently joined. So you can see here, we have this start method here, and we are calling the setup method under the player script, and that's the one up here. And this one takes care of setting the defaults for our players. So that will, first off, it will spawn in a particle system here, a spawn effect. It will also switch the cameras, enable colliders, and set the current health value to the maximum health. So this is just setting up the default player. And we of course only want this to happen for newly joined players. We don't want this to be called for all the players when a new player joins, so that the entire game is just like reset. So in order to fix this, we need to kind of separate our understanding of a newly joined player from the other players. And the way to do this, if we go under our player setup script, you can see that we are calling this from the start method. Well, when we join as a new player, a start method is going to be called on all of the different players. That is because for our local instance, all of the different players that we are joining in the lobby will be spawned into the scene, and therefore their start method will be called. However, what is true for only our player is that we are marked as a local player. So for the client that joins in, only his own player will be marked as a local player. And therefore we can take this setup method and move it from here and up under this else statement. So if we're not the local player, we're going to disable components and assign a remote layer and stuff like that. And else, we are going to call the setup method on our player. And let's just rename this to player setup, just so we are completely sure of what this is doing. And that was basically all we need to change in here. At least for now, we need to fix a bug down here in a moment. Then for our player, if we go in here, we find our player setup method. You can see that that has now been renamed too. From here, we are now only calling this on the client of the local player on the player. So that's all. So we need to kind of transmit this idea of setting the defaults to all of the other clients, so that when a new player joins, it is not only joined on the actual client that is joining, but all the other players can see him as well, and can see the spawn prefab and his health gets set and all that stuff. So we need to in other words, initialize this player on all the clients. So in order to do this, we are going to use an RPC. And the best way of using a client RPC, again remember, any method that is marked as a client RPC will be called on all clients. The best way to call one of these is from a command. So let's start by making a command. So in order to do this, we are going to take all of this code and simply copy it. And then we can make a private void here. And we're going to call this maybe CMD. And this is the broadcast new player setup. Something like that. Just don't be afraid of using very long names if they're descriptive of what we're doing. And this is basically what we're doing. We're telling the server to broadcast out to all of the different clients that a new player should be set up. So you can of course call this something else if that makes more sense to you, but I think this will be pretty clear on what we're doing. And then from here we want to call an RPC. So we can now make that as well. We mark this as a client RPC. And we make this again a private void because we're only calling it from the same script. And we're marking this as an RPC. And this is the setup player on all clients. Cool. And in here we want to check for or initialize this array. And we want to call the setDefaults method. And of course we need to call the RPC from the server. And we need to let the server know from the local player client. So that is kind of all we need to do here. Then what we need to do as well is we need to separate setting up the player from managing the current active camera and the current active UI. Because currently we are using this switch cameras, which is wrapped in an if statement. And we kind of need to separate this out. All of the other code we can leave be, but this shouldn't be handled in the setDefaults. This should instead be handled up here before we actually call this on the command. Because we only want to switch the camera and enable the player UI on the local player. We don't need all of the other clients doing that as well. And since when in the player setup, we are checking if we are the local player before we're calling player setup, there's really no need to wrap this in an if statement. So we can just go ahead and delete that if statement and just have these two method calls for themselves. Good. And of course, when we are switching the cameras here, we are setting the scene camera to false and the player UI to true. We also need a way of, we also need to do this in the respawn method down here. So since we are no longer including this in the setDefaults, we need to just, put it in here. So we need to switch the cameras here as well. So when we respawn, again, we set the scene camera active to false, and we set instead the player UI to true. Good. So that should actually be all. And I know we didn't do this in the last video, but I kind of had to think about a somewhat robust way of doing this. And notice that I still have this kill command in here, so we can use that in a moment, because there is still a problem with this. So let's try and go in here, and just first let's try this on the local player. So let's try and hit play and select LAN host. And you can see that this is indeed working, and we can again stop him from playing, and everything is enabling and disabling as we would want it to. So now let's try and make a build of this. So Control B or Command B if you're on a Mac, and let's see if this is working on the player, or the build player here as well. So wait for the light to rebuild here, hit play on that, and it should also be playing here. And what we'll be doing is we'll select LAN host here, and we'll select LAN client here, and you can see now it only spawns the prefab for this particular client, so that's perfect. And you will also see that if we go ahead and damage this guy, you can see on the console it says he now has, let's say, 75 health. And we then drop out here, we disconnect, and we'll notice something weird with the cameras here, but we're going to fix that in just a moment. And then we join as a client again, and find the player, there he is, and damage him. and go in the console here, it's spamming with these. Oh, it's spamming way too much. We can't, maybe we cannot find it. I'll just try to. No, this is going way too crazy, unfortunately. Okay, so let's fix this error instead. So what is happening here? Well, let's just move out of our build here. What is happening here is that if we find our set defaults method, we are not doing anything with the camera here, but in our player setup, on the disable, meaning when we are destroyed, and we are basically only destroyed whenever we choose to disconnect, well then it's setting the scene camera active to true. But it's doing that for all of the clients, not only the local player. So we need to check if we are the local player. So if is local player, well then we can change the cameras. Okay? So that makes sense. So now when we try and hit play here, and we can maybe try and disconnect, that looks fine. We can try and kill ourselves here by pressing K. You can see it jumps out here to the scene view and jumps back in, so that's perfect. And now we can try and build this. So let's build it. And that was the bug that I was talking about before. I just wanted to show you what that did. It simply triggered the camera for all of the players, which of course is not something we desire. So let's hit play here. Host, LAN client. It only spawns for this guy. Damage this guy a bit. So now he's on 70 health. Disconnect. Everything is okay over here. Everything is okay over here. Let's connect again. And whoa, we spawned on top of each other there. That was kind of weird, but that was because we didn't move. Of course, we can implement some kind of way of checking for that. And then we can now damage him again, and you can see it remembers what health amount he was on. So it's no longer reset as it was before, and that's super good. So now we can kill him, and he explodes and goes to the scene view there, and he jumps back in, and he should... Oh! Well, now he's no longer spawning on this guy's network. So what's going on here? Well, I'm just going to pause the camera here and then I'll be back in a moment. Alright, so I figured out what was going wrong. It seems that we are only calling the set defaults method under our respawn method, and our set defaults is not marked as a client RPC. So that kind of goes wrong because we are only calling this on the local client of the local player. And that's not good. We want to set up the player that has respawned on all of the different clients. So what we want to do is instead call the player setup method. And I'm just going to go ahead and rename this to setup player, because then we won't confuse it with the player setup script. I think that's a better idea. Then we can also take all of this and simply remove it, because we are doing that under the setup player method anyways. Then let's go up to our setup player and configure this a bit. So now we want to check whether or not, that's a phone going off, whether or not we are the local player. So if is local player, well then we want to do all of this stuff. We deleted it before because we were only calling it from one place, but now we're also calling it from down there, so that would be a good idea. Okay, so now that we have this in here, everything else should be working. However, we only want to do this operation at the very beginning, when we first join in, not every time we respawn, because this remembers what components was enabled, and therefore it knows what to enable again when we respawn. And we don't want to set that to some kind of value right before we want to enable things again. So what we do here is simply do some kind of private float, or I mean some kind of private bool, which is named is first setup, or maybe just first setup, and we default that to true. And then down here we simply write if first setup. Then we can do this kind of initialization stuff, and then after we've done that, we set first setup to false. This way we only do this once. It's maybe a bit of a hack, but it works very solid. Okay, and then down here, under our respawn method, now we are setting our position and our rotation on the network, and it will kind of throw that out on the network and make sure it's synced to everyone using another component. And then we are calling the setup player, which will then throw a message out to all the different clients to set up the player properly. However, we want to make sure that this position and rotation is submitted to all of the different players, or transferred to all of the different clients before we set up the player. Else, we will have a case where we haven't moved the player, or it seems that the player hasn't moved because the client hasn't received a message for it to move him. And then we spawn the particles in the wrong place. So I simply want to put in just a tiny bit of an error margin here, a yield return new wait for seconds, where we wait say 0.0 or 0.1 second. That should be plenty. It's not noticeable in the game, and it's a very easy idea if you want to, or very easy thing to do if you just want to delay this a little bit to make sure that we are moving the player before instantiating the particles. So if we try this now, this should look super cool. So let's try and build the player, and this should hopefully be the final time we need to mess with this, and then we can leave it be for a while. It's very confusing to do this stuff, trust me, I know. And then we can hit play, go on to LAN host, go on to LAN client, and we can kill this guy off and see if it works. So there we go, he explodes and he should respawn there. That's perfect, and we can do the same again. He explodes there, and he should respawn over there, and he does. So that's perfect. So that small delay made sure that everything is now working as it should. Good. So now that this is working, the game should be very playable, and you should definitely be able to try this out. So what I want to do is now just clean up some of the code here. So I want to take this if input get key down here, this kill method, and maybe just comment that out. And since we're not using the entire update method, I'm just going to mark all of that with comments. So that's perfect. And the next thing that I wanted to do just very quickly in this video is have an offline scene and an online scene. This is of course our online scene. So let's go ahead and make a new scene, pressing Ctrl N. And let's go ahead and save this as maybe our lobby scene, just lobby maybe, and this can still be our main level. And we can just go ahead and maybe remove the directional light. We're not going to be using that, so simply delete that. And we can make a UI here, simply an image that we will stretch to the entire screen by holding down Alt and clicking down here. And this is just going to be a fairly dark color, something like that, just very flat, some kind of very simple UI could be put in here. Then we go to our main level, we find our network manager, take our two spawn points and move them out of here somewhere. We can maybe move them down here. Then we take our network manager, we drag in our main level under the online scene and our lobby under the offline scene. Whoops. We need to add it to the build settings, so file, build settings, drag in the lobby scene, and we want that to be appearing before our main level. And now we can drag it in here. We can then take our network manager and turn it into a prefab, so let's drag it under the prefabs folder. We can then load in our lobby scene, find our prefabs folder, and drag back in the network manager here. So now we need to make sure that this is synced. And that you apply changes to the prefab here. So now when we hit play in here, we are in a separate scene. When we hit LAN host, it transitions the scene. However, you will notice a small bug, and that is that the lighting is currently very weird when we do this. It's not really baked. And the reason for this is that Unity dynamically bakes the lighting in the scene, but when it transitions to a new scene, it sometimes doesn't do that. So let's just go and find our lighting. This is found under Window, lighting, and then go under the light maps tab, and down here it's currently set to auto. If we just disable that and hit build to build the lighting one last time, and you will need to do this every time you change the lighting in the scene from now on, this error shouldn't happen. So if we go to our lobby, hit play, LAN host, you can see that the lighting is correctly built. So now we have this kind of a cool relationship between a lobby scene where we are offline and a main level scene where we are online. Later we can expand this to having players join, maybe you can select a character, whatever. There's plenty of opportunity to this. So that's kind of all I wanted to show you for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.